Welcome to Channel 24. Stanislav Belkovsky, political analyst and publicist, is joining me now. There is so much happening around the so-called peace plan, Europe's reactions and Moscow's attempts to rewrite the narrative once again. So, Stanislav, thank you for being with me today.
Hello, and thank you for your invitation, as usual.
Stanislav, Dictator Putin now says that no peace plan ever existed, only a set of topics for discussions. Has this whole process hit a dead end, or were we always in an illusion from the start?
Vladimir Putin is a master of formalities, and formally maybe he's right. From the legal point of view, there is no plan, just a concept. But as a matter of fact, there is no principal difference between plan and concept, and the concept undoubtedly does exist. Initially, it's been worked out by Kirill Dmitriev and his allies and his staff, as far as we can understand it now, then handed over to Stephen Witkoff, Donald Trump's special envoy, and then some rewritten and reworked in Washington, including the Department of State and its head, Marco Rubio, and as well staff of Vice President J.D. Vance, including Mr. Driscoll, who is an Army Minister and American Ministry of War, former Ministry of Defense. And so now we deal with this document, corrected in Geneva with the participation of Ukrainian representatives headed by Andriy Yermak, as we know. And so Putin confirmed he's got it officially from the United States back. Of course, it's not that very document handed over to Stephen Witkoff by Kirill Dmitriev in late October. And so now the plan exists. And so we can, but we still don't know the concrete content of the plan. And now the US and Kremlin both decided not to inform, not to reveal the full text of the plan to European Union, being afraid that the European Union can fight the process and would try to terminate the process somehow, being not very much interested in putting stop to the war this year.
Yes, but after the leak showing that Steve Witkoff advised the Kremlin aide on how to sell the plan to Donald Trump, Trump's chief negotiator is under, heavy fire in Washington, and yet the president of the United States, he is defending him. Why?
There is a substantial contradiction between the so-called deep state, professional political administrators and diplomats, headed by Marco Rubio, maybe the only real professional inside Trump's team, and the Trump system of special envoys. And this conflict is more long-term and profound than we can perceive it just now, because it does exist for decades. At the very beginning of this century, the question arose, is the traditional diplomacy still so efficient under the conditions? Many delicate questions between different countries, leaders, elites are decided and resolved through some network of informal communications. And the rise of network systems in this century and with coming of the new epoch, contrary to traditional hierarchies, including diplomatical hierarchy, so have burst out this conflict. So I think this harsh polemics around Stephen Witkoff and his conversations with Yuri Ushakov and conversation between Yuri Ushakov and Kirill Dmitriev eavesdropped by someone, I don't know who it might be, but the first suspected should be American special services with their enormous possibilities to do something like this, I think. And so because American special services could support Marco Rubio and the professional diplomats, deep state in this fighting. Though Donald Trump, being not a professional politician and not even professional businessman, Donald Trump is first and foremost showman, And his his field of most efficient efforts was show business, namely show business itself. And secondly, he's someone who is called deal maker or operator. For Donald Trump, the fact of the deal is the deal itself, as a result of the deal. And the announcement of the deal as a result of the deal. The deal is successful just and when it's announced. And it's the logic of Donald Trump. That's why he insists that he has put stop to 8 wars, regardless of his merits. And those processes are at least doubtful, at least at several wars mentioned by him usually. But if, for instance, Armenia and Azerbaijan sign the agreement in Washington in presence of Donald Trump, he deserves, he does really think he has put stop to the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Though by 2/3, it's very, very doubtful, of course, if we know what's happened in reality. So that's why for Donald Trump himself, this system on informal, delicate communications involving big businessmen was just alternative perception of confidentiality and demand for confidentiality is much more comfortable than the traditional hierarchical diplomacy. That's why Washington is so angry, and Washington bureaucracy about what's going on. Donald Trump supports Stephen Witkoff because in this understanding and in this connection, Stephen Witkoff is Trump, it's himself.
Yes, and also Putin publicly presents the US peace plan as a starting point for negotiations while warning Ukraine's army. How can the conversation return to, how can we go back to the start to return to a fair, realistic conditions instead of a framework built on Moscow's terms, obviously? How do we, reset this frame so that sovereignty, borders, and security are not negotiable for Ukraine?
The fundamental question, in my opinion, is if Ukraine remains still sovereign and free state, country with democracy, a free country with democracy. While the basic objective of Vladimir Putin, basic goal of Kremlin dictator, is vice versa, as we know, to make Ukraine the satellite statehood of Russian Federation, and in such way bring it to the first stage to classical autocracy, and the second stage to classical Putin-style totalitarianism. We still don't know what the so-called Trump plan does consist of. But as far as we understand its content right now, it implies, of course, that Ukraine remains the sovereign and free state. And that does not coincide with the top objective of Vladimir Putin, who was really sure he could win this war in 2 weeks and topple the Ukrainian power and place its puppet regime headed by Viktor Medvedchuk instead. So another fundamental question of the plan on all the things around is if the United States, Europe, and other friendly partners of Ukraine, at least conditionally friendly at this stage, like the United States, are prepared for the modern analog of Marshall Plan for Ukraine. The plan of revival of the Ukrainian economy and bringing back millions of Ukrainians forced to leave the country during this full-scale war. If both questions are answered yes, so I think it's acceptable for Ukraine to discuss further the second row conditions. But let's read what would be given to the public as a full text of this plan. We still don't know.
Stanislav, was it actually a mistake for European leaders to take this plan so seriously from the very beginning, to meet in Geneva and treat a Moscow reading document as a credible basis for talks?
Well, I wouldn't call this document Moscow written. It's, of course, several times written by American part including not just Steven Witkoff, but Marco Rubio and that staff, the Department of State. Though I would emphasize again, we don't know what does this plan contain right now. That's why all our discussions on that could be a little bit superficial. So, and in coming days, maybe we know what is really meant. But European leaders, of course, are very afraid to be let alone, not just while discussing this plan, but in the modern geopolitical reality, when the United States is no more guarantor of European security. And it's already understandable and understood by many for all this year of the first year of Trump's second term in power. But still, the European leaders are so accustomed to be the partners, the junior partners of the United States, so they can hardly get rid of this idea. They can hardly forget that they should act on their own, breathing on the interests of Europe, regardless of how far those interests coincide with priorities of Washington. That's why they're very nervous about the contents of the plan and how far this plan reflects European interests.
And many analysts say that the real strategic goal of this peace plan was simply to get the US and Europe to lift sanctions from Russia. Do you agree with that? What is the real game behind
the sanctions? The sanctions are secondary issue for Trump.
Yes.
The primary issue is the economy and business pact with Vladimir Putin, involving the enormous natural resources, enormous topics of Arctics, issues of Arctics, as we mentioned several times before, and the placement of large data centers on Russian territory, especially around Arctics and so on. And of course, to come to the opportunity, even to discussion of this official discussion of this full-scale business plan, because because informally, the terms of conditions of this pact have been already discussed during numerous Steven Witkoff's visits to Moscow and St. Petersburg. But officially, Donald Trump gets to launch those activities just after the war is ended, the war is over, at least under the conditions of ceasefire and armistice, because his responsibility to his own constituents, the perception of Republican political circles, the perception of Americans, the majority of which wants peace, but not Putin's unambiguous victory. So all this makes Donald Trump to bring peace first, official and outspoken negotiations with Putin second. But so in this connection, of course, Trump would lift at least partially the sanctions against Russia and get Vladimir Putin normalized as a politician to a very considerable extent. Vladimir Putin would cease to be an aggressor and modern analog of Adolf Hitler. He would get back to his role as a partner of America's partner in some kind of business as usual. But Europe, of course, has just another stance, another approach to all this, because Europe now is preparing itself to full-scale war with Russia. And that's why I'm doubtful Europe would lift its sanctions against Russia. But a considerable part of the Trump plan, and I think Vladimir Putin is aware of that and approves that at least partially, is that Donald Trump would manage the Russian energy supplies of Russian energy resources to different countries and regions of the world. Because now those sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil had a goal, as we realize it now, as we see it now by a number of practical moves by all sides, that to bring the international assets of Lukoil, supplying Russian oil to several European countries and consumers under the American control. Now we see the visit of Viktor Orban, Hungarian Prime Minister, to Moscow, and one of the key issues discussed between Orban and Putin is that Hungarian MOL Energy Corporation would buy the Serbian NIS, also being under American sanctions now. And after the deal is over, so in such way, the Serbian NIS would be put under the under the indirect control of Donald Trump's circles, the sanctions would be lifted. The same thing is being planned, in my understanding, concerning the Ukrainian gas transportation system. Some American corporations close to Trump would take over this control, so purchase Russian natural gas and deliver it to Europe as American gas, no more Russian. So in such way, Donald Trump is trying to become the top player at European energy market, but not just European. It's a very, very considerable aspect of the potential pact being discussed now.
Yes, and speaking about the gas, the Russian energy resources, today the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban flew to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin. What does this move tells us about right now, about Putin, about Orban? How is this all happening so boldly in the heart of Europe when, the Prime Minister is just going to Moscow meet with the dictator?
Well, I don't see anything new, brand new in it. Viktor Orban has never concealed his views, which are openly anti-Ukrainian and pro-Russian, pro-Putin's. He's a tough ally of Donald Trump's, and he has put at risk his relationship with European Union and Brussels while coming to Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate already in summer 2024. Several months before the general election in the United States, and publicly supported Donald Trump. He visited Trump, then presidential candidate, and said to him, "Mr. President, please get back and give us peace." So there's no new questions to Viktor Orban and to his behavior, which is quite understandable all over the world and inside the European Union as well. And in my opinion, as I just told you a few minutes ago, the key issue of Orban's visit is purchasing the Russian share in Serbian NIS Energy Corporation by Hungarian MOL, which is some small part of this potential energy pact between Trump and Putin, involving Viktor Orban as a part of this pact as well. And of course, both Trump and Putin are very interested in Orban, in having Viktor Orban, a Hungarian leader, for ages. And as Vladimir Putin has already confirmed right today at the Kremlin meeting with Orban, they are, all three of them are fully prepared for the summit in Budapest, finalizing all the efforts to work out this Trump's peace plan. Because not just because Budapest is a relatively safe place for Vladimir Putin, but because both Trump and Putin, and of course Orban himself, consider it as an important event of electoral campaign, of Viktor Orban's electoral campaign, in anticipation of Hungarian general elections scheduled for April next year.
Yes, I absolutely no surprise that Orban has this pro-Russian position. My question was more about that why is Orban able to cross these lines again and again, having no consequences?
You mean the consequences from the European Union?
Yes.
No, because Viktor Orban, Viktor Orban has many contradictions with European Union and relationship with Russia and Ukrainian. His understanding of Ukrainian war are not the only ones, because they have contradictions in the field of judicial power, for instance, or the questions of diversity of equality and integrity, and some other European humanitarian standards not maintained and not followed by existing power in Budapest. So Viktor Orban feels comfortable in this role and his niche of Euro dissident. At the same time, he meets his traditional obligations to the European Union. He understands that it's quite unfavorable for his country and himself to get out of the European Union, and the European Union has no legal mechanism to punish Viktor Orban for that. Maybe this reflects the inefficiency of European Union constructions, but the European Union has never anticipated such kind of conflicts. Just 10, even 5 years ago, European bureaucrats, the leaders of pan-European structures were quite calm and optimistic that nothing dramatic could challenge the European unity. Now this European unity is really challenged, and what could bring to Europe this feeling of unity, this feeling of necessity of the European Union itself as a united and solid structure, is of course a war threat from Vladimir Putin's part. In that understanding, Vladimir Putin plays a positive role, how paradoxical it could sound, especially for myself, in putting European Union together.
And finally, Stanislav, I've heard the news today that Belgium's Prime Minister, Bart de Wever, or I don't know, probably it's correct, he now warns that using frozen Russian assets for Ukraine could hurt the chances of a peace deal. Is this a serious concern or another example of Europe being afraid to upset Putin?
I don't think Europe is afraid to upset Putin.
Yes.
Europe is afraid to upset investors from all over the world.
Russian investors
might become nervous about the destiny of their assets of Europe if such a precedent would be created. Of course, and it reflects the inefficiency of European structures as well, because Europe had almost 4 years to work out the legal framework for such decision, to pass the necessary laws, and bring all this issue to courts, to judicial decisions. Because, of course, in full accordance with European law and with letter and spirit of European legislation, the property rights could be changed only through judicial mechanisms, not by decisions of executive or legislative powers. Today, we do not observe such mechanism. The European Union doesn't have it legal mechanism who could persuade the foreign investors that the precedent would never concern their funds and assets placed in Europe. Especially, I mean, Chinese investors in China, Arab investors, and many, many others, whose trillions of dollars are an inalienable component of European economy and financial stability. But Europe has wasted all those 4 years. No legislation has been passed, and nothing has been done in courts. So it's another reflection that European Union urgently needs to reinvent itself and to improve the mechanisms of itself, including pan-European unity, to be efficient in counterbalancing the aggressive autocracies like Russia.
Yes, absolutely. Stanislav, thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you so much. Entirely at your disposal. See you soon. Bye-bye.